Summer's supposed to be the easy season. So why are so many people quietly Googling a therapist between summer Fridays? Because more daylight doesn't fix the hard stuff. Sometimes it just turns the volume up. Grow does therapy differently. Therapy is not only for when you're in crisis. Grow Therapy is here for all the moments when you decide you want more. More support, more clarity, more tools. Mental health isn't a destination you reach, it's something you build, and Grow makes that easier. Grow connects you with thousands of high-quality licensed therapists across the U.S., offering both virtual and in-person sessions, nights and weekends. You can search by what matters, like insurance, specialty, identity, or availability, and get started in as little as 2 days. There are no subscriptions, no long-term commitments. You just pay per session. Grow helps you find therapy on your time. The therapist you want takes your insurance on Grow. Grow accepts over 125 insurance plans. Sessions average $21 with insurance, and some pay as little as $0 depending on their plan. Visit growtherapy.com/booknow today to get started. That's growtherapy.com/booknow. growtherapy.com/booknow. Availability and coverage vary by state and insurance plan.
Stoveleg Media, igniting conversation.
Hey everybody, and welcome back once again to True Crime Cast.
Jamie, this is your week. You've been doing a lot of research and giving us a pretty interesting topic here, so why don't you get the ball rolling?
Yeah, John, after us doing 3 consecutive weeks on famous, gruesome serial killers, I just couldn't bring myself to do another serial killer. But we are going to stay in a pretty well-known case, and we're going to talk today about the murder of Laci Peterson. This was a big case that happened in late 2002. The story really emerged in early 2003. And we're going to walk you through what actually happened, what the evidence was, and who we think ultimately killed her. Let's start out by talking about her husband, shall we? He was the man accused of her murder after all. His name is Scott. He was born in October of 1972. His parents were Lee Peterson, who was a businessman, and Jackie Latham, who owned a boutique. He was born and raised out in San Diego, California. He was the only child to his parents that they had together, but he was the 7th child in the family. If you think of a Brady Bunch scenario, if they had another kid, that would have been Scott. He had a normal childhood growing up. It said that he really loved playing golf, John. He was actually pretty good. What's crazy, and I know you're a bigger golf fan than me, but he played on the same high school team as Phil Mickelson. Is he good at golf?
Absolutely, he's good at golf. That's incredible. I didn't know that.
Yeah, actually, the deeper we get into this, some people are going to blame Scott's attitude on the fact that he always tried to be competitive with Mickelson but never could. He did get a scholarship to go and play golf at Arizona State, while his high school teammate Phil Mickelson went on to the PGA Tour. But after less than 1 year, he was actually kicked off the team. He had been getting some of the teammates into partying, and they actually had the number 1 junior golfer in the country on the team at Arizona State that year, John. And Scott had gotten him in some trouble at a party that they had gone to, and that young man's father had complained to the golf coach at Arizona State, and they actually kicked Scott off the team. He transferred from Arizona State and bounced around a little. He was at Cuesta College, and then he ended up at California Polytechnic State University, commonly referred to as Cal Poly. There he majored in agricultural business, and the professors really liked him. They called him a model student. To get through school and to help pay for it, he worked at the Pacific Cafe, which was in the Morro Bay during college, and that's where he met a young lady named Laci Rocha.
Jamie, Laci Peterson was born by the name of Laci Rocha. She was born May 4th, 1975 to Dennis and Sharon Rocha. Jamie, Dennis was actually a dairy farmer. She was the 2nd child in the family. She was raised in Modesto, which is in Northern California. It said that in high school she was a cheerleader, so she was somewhat active and, seemed like she was an outgoing lady. She attended Cal Poly and majored in ornamental horticulture. Jamie, I got a serious question for you, okay?
Yeah.
What is that?
I assume it's a horticulturalist that decorates with ornaments.
Let's go with that.
I'm guessing that's not it. She was probably a lot smarter than me. She probably knows what an ornamental horticulturist is.
Jamie, as you mentioned a moment ago, in 1994, she went to visit a place called Pacific Cafe, where she met a waiter named Scott. So apparently she thought this guy was good looking. She actually left her number on the table, and then the rest is history. They started dating right after that. They were engaged in December of 1996. They were married the next year on August 9th, 1997. She graduated from college in December that year, and Jamie Scott went on to graduate the next year, June of 1998.
Laci got a job while Scott was finishing up college, and then once he finished up, they actually opened a business, John. They opened a sports bar called The Shack. There are a lot of rumors out there about where they got the money. Some people believe that Laci's family gave the money, but there's really no evidence for that, and it's actually said that her parents were not supportive of them opening the business because they felt like it was a bad investment. Eventually, business did pick up. They were doing really well. They were spending all of their time together. They operated this sports bar themselves. Like a lot of young couples, they decided to live it up early in their marriage, and they wanted to wait to have kids. Apparently, Laci didn't want to wait too long, though. In the year 2000, she sat down with Scott and she told him that she was ready to have kids and that she would like for them to move forward in trying to grow their family. He didn't seem too happy about this, John, and a lot of people are going to reference that as part of why they think he may have killed her. Do you think it's out of character for a young man a couple years out of college and married to want to delay having kids?
I mean, Jamie, everybody's different. I think each couple that we could talk to would have different thoughts and feelings on when they want to bring children into this world, so it's not out of the question that he would want to do this.
Yeah, I certainly don't think that makes him somebody that's going to kill her to avoid having kids. So they sold the shack, and they moved out to Modesto where her family lived. Actually, John, the shack was open until 2014, so it's only been closed for 4 years, even though this case was almost 20 years ago.
Laci did some work as a substitute teacher as a way just to make a little bit of an income. Scott was able to put his degree to use at a company called Telecorp USA, where he was selling fertilizer. He was actually the West Coast representative for the company, and they were trying to establish themselves. He was making pretty decent money, Jamie, and Laci loved being in the role of a housewife. She was happy with her life. She had no complaints. She enjoyed doing that kind of work. Like some couples, unfortunately, they did have some trouble conceiving a child. They actually had to see a fertility expert, and it took a long time, Jamie. It took 1.5 years for this couple to get pregnant. In the summer of 2002, they found out they were going to have a baby boy, and they actually settled on the name Connor. So she was pretty far in her pregnancy, far enough along for them to know they were having a boy. If we fast forward, though, to December 23rd, 2002, Laci was having a rough time. Her feet were swelling up, so she actually canceled all of her plans for the day and spent the day at a salon where she was able to put her feet up. Now, around 8:30 p.m., she called and spoke with her mother. And Jamie, this is the last person other than her husband that she would ever speak with.
Of course, the next day was Christmas Eve, John. Scott got up around 9 a.m. and he started getting ready to go on a fishing trip. He was going to go about 90 miles to the Berkeley Marina in Richmond, California. It was in the San Francisco Bay area. San Francisco Bay is an area that collects water from a lot of streams and rivers in the area. It settles in the San Francisco Bay before feeding out to the Pacific Ocean. So it's kind of like a big lake. He had originally said that he was going to go play golf, but he said it was too wet that day. In retrospect, it doesn't seem like it rained in Modesto, California on that day, John, but it could have been wet for other reasons, could have been dew, it could have just been the time of year. Since he was the West Coast representative for Trade Corp John, he actually had his own warehouse where he kept a lot of their materials, and that's where he had his boat parked. So he loaded some umbrellas into the back of his truck that he needed to take to the warehouse, and he headed out there before he went to the lake. There was a machine that had arrived in the mail, so he took the time to put that machine together. He picked up his 14-foot boat that he had just recently bought, and he headed up to the lake. According to Scott, Laci was at home. Her plans for the day included watching Martha Stewart, mopping the floors, and taking the dog for a walk. Around 10:30 a.m., John, we have a report from a neighbor that she saw their golden retriever running around the neighborhood with its leash attached. That's kind of the first indicator that something's wrong here. So she caught the dog, he was very friendly. She went and knocked on the door. There was no answer, even though Laci's vehicle was there. Since she didn't get an answer, she tossed the dog in the backyard. Around 4 p.m., Scott arrives home from fishing, and he cannot find his wife at the house.
Yeah, Jamie, he walks into the house, and he notices a few things. First off, he notices that Laci's gone. There's no sign of her. Her SUV's still in the garage. The mop bucket's out. The dog's in the backyard. I mean, there's really no sign that she's taken off anywhere, but she's not there. He obviously doesn't think too much of this because the next things that he does doesn't seem to show that he's in any kind of a panic. He reports that he takes a shower, he takes off his clothes, and he washes those clothes separately. He washes them by themselves. He would later tell investigators that he would always do this because at his warehouse where he works with chemicals, so he wouldn't want to wash those clothes with other clothes. And I get that. I mean, Jamie, I gotta be honest, if I'm out mowing my yard or doing some work, outside, when I come in and take a shower, I often throw those clothes in the wash by themselves and not mix in other clothes with it. So, I mean, as far as I go, that adds up. He reported to eat some pizza. Jamie, in one of the podcasts I listened to, it's reported that he actually told officers that he took pizza into the shower with him. Now, we're two large dudes sometimes, right?
Yes.
Not sometimes, but, I mean, have you ever taken pizza to the shower?
No, there's no level of casual that involves me eating in a shower. I love food so much that I wouldn't risk it getting wet before I eat it.
Well, hold on. You need to try eating an orange in the shower. We'll talk more about it off the air, but it's incredible. You got to try that. Okay?
Okay.
Anyway, the dude reports to eating pizza in the shower. I mean, that's whatever. I don't understand it.
Doesn't make him a murderer.
Well, it does make him an awful human being.
Touché.
Around 5:20 that afternoon, he called Laci's stepdad, whose name is Ron. And Ron is the one who calls 911 and reports Laci missing.
So Johnny's been home since 4. It's an hour and 20 minutes before he lets anybody know that he hasn't seen Laci or calls to see if anybody else has seen her, right?
I mean, that's what we have, Jamie. I don't have in front of me, perhaps you know. I mean, has he tried to call Laci in this hour and a half?
See, it's 2002. From the reports I've seen, her keys and purse were found in the house, but it never mentions a cell phone. I think I got a cell phone in 2002, but it was one of those brick phones that was prepaid. I would think that they were a pretty well-to-do family in California. You would think that they had a cell phone, but maybe they shared one, but that doesn't come up in anything that I've seen. So I don't know if there was a way for him to try to reach out to her.
Yeah, I mean, they are a well-to-do family. I mentioned earlier that the SUV is still there. That SUV is a Land Rover. He's driving a pretty nice truck for work. He's able to buy a boat. This is, like you said, 2002, so not everybody has cell phones, but I would think this couple, having all the things they have, would have at least 2 cell phones. But anyway, we don't have any documents. We don't have any records of that. So yeah, I am surprised that an hour and a half later he calls her stepdad, and her stepdad is the one that calls 911. Police come to the home. Scott shows them around, and he's extremely cooperative with them. He shows them around the house, shows everything. The next day, Jamie, there's a community search in Luma Park where she was supposed to be walking her dog. So their community members are out there doing a large search, trying to sweep to see if there's any signs of her or any signs that she was there at least.
And that's Christmas Day. There are people giving up their time on Christmas Day to help find this young lady, to let you know what kind of community they were living in and the support they had.
That's a good point. Jamie, 2 days later, police actually were able to get a warrant to search the house and his warehouse at work. And they didn't really find that much. Scott showed him a landing slip for the boat dock, so he was able to provide documentation to support his alibi. He was actually at the lake that day, and he has a time-stamped slip showing that he was there. He also has a receipt from parking at the marina, and both of those, like I said, were time-stamped. Now, Jamie, at the warehouse, they also check out the boat, and this is where things, in my opinion, start looking a little interesting and start showing some things that are going to hurt Scott's alibi. They found a spot where there had been 5 homemade anchors that had been made, and now they're not there anymore. Jamie, first thoughts on the anchors?
Yeah, I guess anchors are expensive. I feel like when I was growing up, we would go to lakes pretty often. We didn't have an actual anchor. We would just find an old plated weight or something we weren't using anymore and tie that to the boat and throw it down. So I don't think it's odd that somebody would make their own anchors. It sounds like a pretty easy process and a lot cheaper than buying actual anchors. But it's the fact that they weren't there anymore. There was, I guess, one tied to the boat as serving as an actual anchor, but there were 4 that were completely missing.
Well, and Jamie, I mean, just right off the bat, I have to ask, you mentioned I would probably be the one in this duo that would be better at golf, but you are a fisherman and you've been on the lake a lot. Any reason for more than one anchor to be on a boat?
I don't know a ton about the San Francisco Bay, but it's a very small boat. A 14-foot boat is not anything of note. It's actually pretty small for a bass boat or something like that. So I would think that one anchor would serve whatever purpose that he needed to. So 5 certainly would not be necessary for that boat.
Right. And given the fact that you only need one anchor, given all the things they have, like I mentioned, the Land Rovers, the trucks, I mean, this is a well-to-do family. I find it odd that he would spend time making his own anchor. I mean, why not just go out and buy one? But now we have reports of 5 anchors being made, and now they're gone. They also found a pair of pliers with hair in them, and they were able to do some DNA testing on that hair. They found that it belonged to a white female, and it was the same hair color of Laci. Jamie, this doesn't confirm that it is Laci's hair, just that it matches the markers for Laci. I mean, do you want to explain that a little bit?
Yeah, I have no idea why we can't get the same DNA out of hair that we get off of skin or saliva or something like that, but we cannot confirm whether a hair is 100% belong to somebody. They put those under microscopes, and basically with hair samples, those are best used to rule people out. So you can look at a hair and say, well, that texture is nothing like this other person, or it's not even close to the same color as another person. So you can rule people out, but you can never say this is absolutely that one person. You say this could be that one person based on the texture and color. So it's a very inexact science.
Well, that's exactly what we have here. I mean, this hair certainly could have belonged to Laci, but we cannot 100% say that it did belong to Laci. Of course, this story hit the media, and it became very quickly a national sensation. I mean, Jamie, I lived in Tennessee, you lived in Eastern Kentucky. I guarantee you remember this case being on the news.
Absolutely, it was huge. I mean, any missing person can be a big story. But if you have a pregnant woman that goes missing, that tugs on so many heartstrings that the media is going to put that out there as much as they can because they know people are going to care about that. There was a reward offered for information leading to her whereabouts. There was a call center established, like you said, the day after she went missing, which was Christmas Day. They established this call center. There were over 1,500 people who volunteered to search the park, to search the neighborhood. Everybody, I would say, in the country, John, was familiar with the name Laci Peterson. Police were secretly suspicious of Scott, and reports now show that her family was as well. He just didn't seem to react in ways that they would expect somebody missing their spouse to react. Since they were suspicious, they searched the area where he had been fishing with cadaver dogs, and they really didn't come up with anything. It said that he went back to the bay several times while they were searching. Some people find that suspicious, especially the fact that every time he showed up, he was in a different rental car. But if you think about it, John, they had impounded both of his vehicles, so he had to get up there somehow. He was seen there, so I don't think he was necessarily trying to hide. And if I had someone in my life that was missing and I knew the police were searching somewhere, I would think I would want to be there. So do you find it suspicious that he was around those searches?
No, not really, Jamie. I mean, like you said, if something were to happen to anybody that I'm close to and I know the police are in the area doing a search, I want to go see if they found anything.
Just a couple months after she had gone missing, John, and again, these are other things that people knock Scott for, he sold her SUV to buy a truck. His truck was still impounded. They gave him her car back. And he said that he needed to make a living. He needed to go to work and he needed a truck. So he's saying that he sold her vehicle so that he could continue working to provide for when she was found. But people from the outside say you don't sell her vehicle unless you know she's not coming back. So there's a lot of controversy there about him trying to get rid of the vehicles. It's also said that he put the house up for sale, but that's never really been verified.
Jamie, this case takes a pretty sharp turn on April 13th, 2003, when a couple are out walking on the shore of Berkeley Marina, and they found the remains of an infant. Jamie, the next day, a torso of a female was found face down on the shore. Now, this is pretty gruesome, folks. Just go ahead and warn you. When the torso was found on the shore, it was missing the head, feet, and arms. DNA did confirm that this was the body of Laci and Connor. When they were doing the investigation of the body, they found that Laci had broken ribs that the investigators believe happened prior to or during her murder. But the cause of death was actually impossible to determine because of the amount of decomposition that had happened to the body. There was actually a lot of debate at this time, Jamie, whether or not Connor was actually born or if he was still inside of Laci when Laci was murdered. More than likely, he was still inside of Laci at the time and came out as she started to decompose. Jamie, I actually read that they were able to look at the umbilical cord and noticed that it was not cut. It was like it was pulled apart from something. So they speculated that as Laci's body began to decompose, that Connor would have just come out of her body and detached the umbilical cord from the floating upwards in the lake. It's really gruesome and it's hard to talk about. So now we have two bodies. We have both the bodies of Laci and Connor. Jamie, these bodies were found really close to the area where Scott was given that he was at during his alibi. So because of the proximity to where he was at, they actually arrested Scott for the murders on April 18th, 2003. He was charged with first-degree murder of Laci, and he was also charged with second-degree murder of Connor.
Going to trial, Scott Peterson hired high-profile attorney Mark Garagos, and he pled not guilty to both charges. On January 20th, 2004, the trial was moved away from Modesto and closer to the Redwood area because people were so hostile towards Scott. So, John, let's go through the evidence here. As far as we know, he was the last person to see her alive. He was present and actually gave his alibi of where the bodies were found, which was 90 minutes away from their home. He sold her car. He had inquired about selling the house. Is this enough to convict somebody of the murder beyond a reasonable doubt to you?
Jamie, we don't have, DNA evidence linking him to this crime. I don't see any reports of her blood found on the boat, on the car, anywhere like that. But here's what I go back to is, why would you have 5 homemade anchors that were in this warehouse and now they're gone? You have a body who comes up missing their head, their arms, and their legs. So that tells me that there are 5 things tied around, 1 being to her head, 2 to her arms, and 2 to her feet. And I would imagine that those were tied to those anchors. So that is a huge coincidence for me that I just can't get over. But Jamie, that's really not where it ends, right? There's more.
There's certainly more, John. Let's go back to the beginning and look at some other things, some circumstances around their lives and around their marriage. Scott's pretty vocal about not wanting kids, and I know that we talked about him not being excited about starting a family. But it's said that even after they found out she was pregnant, he was very clear to people around him that this was not something that he wanted for his life. And a lot of people reported that it was very awkward in the way that he would talk about it. The boat that he had, it was a recent purchase before she had gone missing. He had owned it for less than a month. He paid cash for the boat. And as far as we know, John, Laci nor anyone in her family knew that boat had existed. Now, of course, he told people he had been fishing that day. But there were reports that the first few people he talked to, John, he told them that he had gone golfing. Now, Scott was not a fisherman. It said that he didn't even know what kind of lures or what kind of bait to use. And he had never really gone fishing before. Maybe he had gone with her father-in-law, who was an avid fisherman, but he had never taken that up as a hobby. He was a golf guy. That's what he did. Fishing wasn't his thing, so why would he go out and buy a boat? You mentioned the anchors. He made 5 of them, and her body was torn apart when it was found. Investigators will claim that at least her 4 limbs, her arms and legs, were tied to anchors. Neighbors that morning, I mentioned that he had stacked some umbrellas in the back of his truck that needed to go to the warehouse. A lot of them said that he was stacking the umbrellas on top of, quote-unquote, a bunch of other stuff. One neighbor even reported that on his way out of the neighborhood, it looked like things were going to fall out of the back of his truck. So she went to stop him to tell him, and he made eye contact with her and sped away as if he didn't want to talk to her. And what was it, John? We mentioned it was an hour and 20 minutes. What was he taking his time doing when he got home?
Jamie, that's something that I just really don't understand. If I come home and notice that my wife's car is home, but she is not, and all of her things seem to be there, like the purse. You know, this case made me think about the case we spoke about in a long time ago in a podcast about the Lonnie Van case down in La Follette, Tennessee. The husband came home, saw all of his wife's belonging in the home, and immediately knew there was a problem. Yet Scott comes home, sees the same things, and takes an hour and a half before he calls not the police, but her stepdad, and then her stepdad calls the police. I don't really understand why it took such a long amount of time for him to realize there's a problem. Their relationship actually had more problems that Laci wasn't even aware of. On December 30th, a lady named Amber Fry calls the police and confesses that she and Scott had had an affair. Now, she had pictures and witnesses to verify that they were in a relationship. She reported they met at a conference in Fresno, California. She was a massage therapist in town, and he was introduced to her through another woman that he tried to seduce at a bar. So right off the bat, Jamie, this is kind of interesting information, right?
Yeah, there are rumors of other affairs that he had had during his marriage, but this is the only one that could be verified. She had documentation, and as we'll see, she continued to verify that to police.
It said that their first date was on November 20th, 2002. Jamie, that was just a little over a month before Laci would have disappeared. We see on December 9th, 2002, she finds out he's married, but he told her, "I lost my wife." Jamie, I'm interested to hear your thoughts on that comment.
So if he's trying to convince her that he is married but no longer in that relationship, for example, if he would have said, "My wife and I are separated," to try to salvage his relationship with Amber Fry, or "My wife has left me," or "My wife and I are planning to get a divorce," something more specific, you could see him trying to lie to maintain that relationship. But in my mind, anytime I hear somebody say they lost someone, I always assume that that's by death.
Right. I mean, I think that's a normal way to say that. So, very odd thing to say. Almost sounds like premeditation, just to be honest. Jamie, she actually volunteered to record some conversations with Scott after the investigation. And on New Year's Eve, while at a vigil for Laci, we see a conversation take place where Scott calls Amber and says that he's in Paris. Now, Jamie, I hate to keep coming back to you, but It's just such a odd and crazy thing to see Scott at a vigil for his deceased wife and deceased son, and he takes time to call Amber and says that he's out of the country. I just can't wrap my head around that.
Yeah, he actually was on the phone with her at the vigil, and he was making up friends that he had made in France. And he was saying, I'm here with insert French name that Scott Peterson claimed to be with. And sounded like he was having a good time. He was not at the front of the vigil thanking people for coming to support his family as they were searching for his wife. He was in the back at the vigil on the phone with his girlfriend.
Jamie, why would he think that this woman wouldn't find out who he was? I mean, this is all over the news at this point. Why would he be naive enough to think that she's not going to be on to him and that he is the husband of this lady who's been murdered?
Yeah, John, it's not long before he figures that out. On January 6th, in a recorded conversation, she's really trying to bait him into confessing what he had told her in the past. So he says, look, you may have seen it on the news. There's a lady named Laci Peterson missing. That was my wife, and I just want to be upfront with you about that, because he knew she was going to find out. But she really pushes him, John, and eventually she gets him to say, yes, I told you almost a month ago that I had said that I lost my wife, weeks before she had disappeared. So for police, John, to hear him say on a phone call, yes, weeks before she disappeared, I told you that my wife was lost, just kind of confirmed it for them. So that's when they really put the clamps down on him and started searching even deeper for the evidence. Again, he's been accused of other affairs, but this one is really no doubt about it. The timing of his affair and the fact that it continued after she disappeared. Look, if he had started an affair with this woman in November, his wife disappears on Christmas Eve, and he says, look, I can't be with you right now. I've got to focus on these other things. It doesn't look as bad, but he's at the vigil talking to his girlfriend. He's continuing to see her and to date her and to try to pursue her. Once this came out in the public, John, anybody that was giving him the benefit of the doubt turned on him. There's this missing pregnant woman whose husband is having an affair and continuing to do so. He was very guilty in the eyes of pretty much everyone. We don't have time to go into everything, John, but here are some other things that really weren't a good look for him. The week before Laci's disappearance, he has a computer search history of currents in the San Francisco Bay and how they flow out to the Pacific Ocean. So that looks as if he's planning to put something in the San Francisco Bay and hopes it'll make it out to the ocean. Just 2 days after she went missing, he added some pornography channels to his television package. Her family said that he would not look them in the eye or talk about Laci missing to them. He wouldn't answer any questions. He really avoided her family. He avoided physical contact. He didn't accept any condolences from them. And that was very odd to them. Also, he didn't engage with the media. John, anytime that we see somebody go missing, their family stepping up in the media and reaching out to the public, a lot of times can make a big difference on people calling in tips. It pulls on people's heartstrings even more to say, I have to help this person find their loved one. And he wasn't doing that at all. But really, final shoe to drop here for Scott was what happened when he was arrested. When they went to arrest Scott Peterson, John, he had dyed his hair blonde. In his truck, which he has bought with the money from selling her SUV, there was $15,000 in cash. There was a map of Fresno, California, which had a path drawn to where Amber Fry's workplace was. He had a gun, and he had a handful of Viagra. So if you look at all these things together, it looks as if he plans to go to Fresno, potentially hurt Amber to get her to stop trying to help the prosecution or help the police. And then it looks like he's going to flee somewhere. John, he's got a gun and a bag full of cash. What else is he going to do besides run away?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. It's absolutely obvious. I think he plans on getting away from town. $15,000 in cash shows me that he wants no records of him getting money anywhere else. He doesn't want any credit card statements or any credit card purchases popping up. He wants to be off the radar, and $15,000 will get him some time to do that. Jamie, let's look at the prosecution's theory in this case. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. They think that he strangled or smothered her either on December 23rd or early on December 24th, which would have been Christmas Eve. They reported that they believed he wrapped her up in a tarp and tied the boat anchors that we were mentioning earlier to her limbs, which, when the body floated up and landed on the shore, was missing the arms, the feet, and the head. And then he went to the lake and dumped her body there. Possible motives that they were trying to bring up was the possible affair that we were mentioning earlier. They also speculated that she was pregnant and he didn't want to be a dad. This would tie him down for a long time. So he didn't want to be a dad, so he would just take matters into his own hands and murder both his wife and their unborn child, Connor. Jamie, let's talk about some of the defense theories on the case. One of them is just incredibly outlandish, but I want to hear your thoughts on it, and we'll try to be fair in discussing this. They believe that this could have been a tragic satanic cult incident where this cult would have taken her, tied her up, and dumped her in the lake close to where Scott was fishing that morning. Now, I want to, like I said, I want to be fair and just hear your thoughts on this and not try to be biased.
Well, John, if you'll think back to our case on the Lillywood murders with Satan 6 and then our follow-up interview, Justice for Karen, that happened in the late 90s, and that was really in the middle of the satanic panic in our country where people believed that there were satanic cults out there planning murders, planning rituals, planning sacrifices. So if that's happening in the late 90s, this is the early 2000s on the back end of the satanic panic. So I could see that still being such a part of our culture that it could be part of the conversation. But for it to randomly happen once in this neighborhood with this pregnant woman, with all this other evidence pointing at the husband, seems like a big reach for me.
Well, Jamie, I mean, there were a lot of people who were studying this case and actually thought that somebody else could have committed this crime, knew that Scott had been fishing that morning at the marina, and dumped her body there as a way to frame Scott for this. So it certainly is a possibility. I mean, we can't completely rule that out as a possibility, right?
Really, the only way to rule that out, John, is to say that investigators and the autopsy would show that the body had really been in the water pretty much since it disappeared. So I don't know that it was out in the media and public where he had been that day in time for them to dump the body and enough decomposition to take place to be the way they found it in April.
Another theory that the defense threw out was that there was a robbery taking place across the street and that Laci went over to confront them and then was tragically murdered in that regard.
Do you think a 8-month pregnant lady is going to have the A, energy, B, motivation, C, I guess, gumption to confront robbers as opposed to retreating and calling the police?
Jamie, I mean, let's look at this logically. I think the most logical thing for her to have done in that situation would have been to call the police first. I don't think that any sane, logical person would, and especially a pregnant person, would put herself and her child at risk by going over to confront these folks. So I think the more natural series of events would have been for her to call the police and wait for them to come take care of the situation. So,
agreed.
There's another theory they tried to throw out that said that she was actually abducted while she was taking the dog out to walk. Now, there are some things that we could piece together and piece it back to this theory. One, the dog was found with the leash still attached where the neighbor, found it, tried to find Laci, didn't find her, put it in the backyard. There was a call made in the days after this case where a neighbor said that she saw Laci walking the dog and saw her struggle with men, and they tried to put her in a van, right? Yeah. So what do we do with that information? Why would the lady not have called the police when she saw Laci struggling with these people? Just doesn't add up to me. Well, I mean, what do you think about this piece?
Yeah, John, I actually listened to a debate between one of the investigators in the case and what I don't know what else to call this guy, but a Scott Peterson apologist, somebody who thinks he's absolutely innocent. And they do claim that one person saw her struggling and being thrown into a van. They claim that there are other neighbors that saw her walking the dog after Scott had left that morning. And those things are just impossible to explain. The investigator would say that there weren't that many, if any, claims that supported that. And then the dog leash, that's the one thing in my mind is, why would the dog be outside running with a leash? I can't imagine that would be part of Scott Peterson's plan, and I don't know how else that fits into the prosecution's theory. So there are a couple bits and pieces there that I don't know that can be fully explained by the prosecution's timeline of what happened. But I think in most cases, prosecutors really aren't 100% sure what happened every minute of the day, but their general narrative works, regardless of these red herrings or pieces of information that we can't make fit in.
Jamie, as I mentioned before, a lot of people think that Scott may have been potentially framed for this crime. I mean, if you look at the series of events, he was right about everything in the beginning of this investigation. He was where he said he was. They have time-stamped pieces of documentation showing that. He said that she wanted to walk the dog, and the dog was found with its leash still attached. He said that she wanted to watch Martha Stewart that day, and she actually made gingerbread cookies, which is what that episode was about. So that just seems to check out, in my opinion. When they obtained the computers from the house, there were multiple computers, but she was reported to only use one computer. When police obtained her computer, they found that someone that morning had been on the website for the Gap and were looking at clothes. Jamie, on top of all of that, we've already mentioned that several neighbors claimed to see her walking a dog that morning. So there is some room for debate on whether or not Scott was framed for this, if you just look at those pieces by themselves.
Does that create reasonable doubt enough for a jury to say someone is not guilty of murder?
Well, Jamie, on November 12th, 2004, Scott was found guilty of first-degree murder of Laci and second-degree murder of Connor. So, to answer your question, no. I mean, there wasn't enough reasonable doubt for the jury, which is really the only people in this whole thing that matters, right? They didn't find enough reasonable doubt to not convict him of these crimes. And to be really honest, for me personally, it doesn't create enough reasonable doubt for me either. I mean, I'm just being brutally honest. I mean, what do you think, Jamie?
Yeah, I'm with you. I feel like there are some things here that really can't be explained. But I also haven't read the transcript of the trial. Maybe some of these weren't presented in a way that you would expect, or some of these things aren't what they seem when you talk to these Scott Peterson apologists who believe that he was innocent. He may have been smarter than we think, John. Perhaps he did sit the dog out on a leash. Perhaps he did put the mop bucket out to make it look like she had been mopping. Maybe he happened to catch Martha Stewart that morning just to add to his alibi. And he got on her computer and browsed some websites. I don't know if he was forethinking enough to do that. You would think if he was, he also would have deleted his own history from searching the San Francisco Bay Currents. But you never know. The prosecution's case certainly wasn't airtight because there was no physical evidence showing that he committed the murder. But I think the circumstantial evidence in this case is enough to eliminate all reasonable doubt.
I would absolutely agree with you on that, Jamie. Jamie, on December 13th that same year, he received his sentence, which was going to be death by lethal injection. The trial in total took 9 months and cost over $4 million. Jamie, he was also ordered to pay the $10,000, which were the cost of Laci's funeral costs. As jurors discussed this case, they said that his demeanor was cold and emotionless, which made it easier to convict him, as well as his communications with Amber Fry after the disappearance. So all those things together just made this kind of an easy case for the jurors.
It did, and you have to wonder if the child being involved pushed them to the death penalty. A lot of times if a case only has circumstantial evidence, then they'll be more likely to give a life sentence instead of a death sentence. But even though there's no physical evidence here, we see them sentence him to death, which I think is pretty rare. Would you attribute that to a child being involved or a pregnant woman being involved?
I think it would be easy to give that sentence knowing that he killed not only his wife, but also his unborn child as well. I think if I'm a juror, that's a pretty hard thing to do to somebody, convict them of and sentence them to death. But yeah, if you tell me that he also murdered a child, an infant, an unborn human, it's going to be easier for me to sleep at night giving him that sentence knowing that his child was also murdered.
Being completely honest, John, the death penalty in California pretty much means he's going to spend the rest of his life on death row. They actually put very few people to death in California. So essentially it is a life sentence in prison with the death sentence hanging over his head while he's there. He did appeal, of course, in 2012. That didn't really go anywhere. In 2015, his appeal was filed based on the fact that a search dog that was used as a cadaver dog at Berkeley Marina the day that they investigated the scene where they found the bodies, that dog had actually failed several tests that were in similar settings, so I don't know what evidence that dog provided or helped them find that day, but their appeal was all based on that dog, and that was denied. In November of 2015, they added to the appeal that there was a juror that had lied about their background on their jury documentation. They brought up that there were new witnesses that saw Laci alive, walking the dog, and they claimed that he had ineffective counsel, even though he had a very high-priced, high-profile attorney. They say that he was not effective because he didn't introduce more of these witnesses that say they saw her alive. And in another case of them kind of reaching to try to get something to go Scott's way, they tried to claim that the death penalty in California is cruel and unusual punishment. So part of their appeal was appealing an actual law in California. In August of 2017, the final verdict on these appeals were made. The state appellate court basically said, regardless of your point, even if we agree with what you're arguing, the evidence is overwhelming, and another trial would end in the same result. So they denied that appeal, and he currently sits in death row. Is there any chance, John, that you find him innocent, or that he deserves another trial?
Jamie, I hope our listeners don't accuse me of being biased, but I've looked at the evidence. We've both sat here and spoke about what the prosecution had, what the defense had. In my mind, he's guilty of murder for his wife and for his unborn child, Connor. The thing that I always go back to on this particular case is, why would you make 5 boat anchors when you only really need 1? Why aren't they there now? And it appears as if these anchors were tied to her feet, to her hands, and to her head. And when her decomposed body floated up from the bottom of that lake, those things were not there anymore. Her feet and hands and head were ripped off. And in my mind, it's because they're tied to anchors that we were not able to find in the investigation. So, no, I think he's guilty of this murder. I think that all signs are there. I'd be honest with you, though. I would like to see some more physical evidence in regards to, is there blood in his car? Is there blood in the boat? Is there blood in the truck that he used that morning? Was there blood in the house? Perhaps there was no blood. Let's say that he did strangle her. Does he have any defense wounds on his body? It seems unlikely that if he's strangling her, he wouldn't have walked away completely free of any injuries. So, I don't know. There's some things that I would like to see to say with 105% that I'm, that he is guilty. But at the end of the day, with the evidence that we do have, I think he's guilty.
John, I tried harder with this case than any other case I've researched to see the other side of things. I sought out debates between supporters for Scott and people who were pleased with this verdict. I went and read several articles and arguments. There is nothing that I've read that, even if it were true, would change my mind. A lot of the claims are completely illogical. I can't believe that somebody would frame him or even have the time to plant the bodies, especially if they're there searching. How are you going to plant a body where the police are there searching every day? None of the claims of the folks who claim his innocence, in my opinion, hold any water at all. And I've really tried to find something to grab onto to give me reasonable doubt, and I've not been able to find it.
I would hope that for our listeners who have been listening to our show since we started would say that we are objective and that we at least try to consider all possibilities. And I do think that we've done that in this case. However, fortunately, I think we do have enough evidence to say, and the jury had enough evidence to say that he was guilty. So, Jamie, as we often say at the end of our shows, do you think that justice was served in this case?
Not a big death penalty guy, John, being completely honest. I don't know if you and I have ever had that conversation. Not a big fan of the death penalty. I don't think that he'll be put to death. But I do believe that he killed his wife and their unborn son. And I do think spending the rest of his life in prison or even on death row is just for what he did. You?
Yeah, I think that justice was served in this case. I mean, we can have another conversation about the death penalty if we ever wanted to do that. Perhaps that would be a good thing to do on our Patreon account for our loyal listeners who subscribe to that. But regardless of that issue, I do think justice was served in that he will never be a free man again. Whether he's killed by lethal injection or dies in prison, he's never going to be outside. He's never going to see the light of day again. So, yeah, for Laci and for Connor, I do think that justice was served.
Guys, we appreciate you tuning in again this week.
And until next crime, this has been True Crimecast.
You've listened to True Crimecast, distributed by Stoveleg Media. Check out stoveleg.com to find out more about your hosts and to find other podcasts to listen to. Stoveleg Media, igniting conversation.